Today, we are taking a behind-the-scenes look at Denizens Brewery and owner Julie Verratti, who brings her brand of vibrance to this side of Montgomery County. We are definitely happy to be here in downtown Silver Spring, where Denizens Brewery. So please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So we opened Denizens in July of 2014. I founded this company with my wife, Emily Bruno, and our brother-in-law, Jeff Ramirez. So 5 years ago when we opened, we actually created a brand new business model for Montgomery County. So we got some laws changed that allowed us to sell beer directly to other bars and restaurants and package stores around the town, which was not allowed before. So we got a carve-out created for small breweries like us. We also were able to create a tap room model where you can go to your local brewery and not have to have that brewery have a full-scale restaurant. So they're able to partner with local food trucks, et cetera. And so since we opened 5 years ago, I think there's 11 breweries that have opened in Montgomery County since then. It's a pretty cool example of, if you knock down barriers to entry, what you can do to really revitalize a certain industry. Montgomery County's done a really good job of that.
That's awesome. So you're definitely on the vanguard of not only the craft beer industry and bringing someone in, but you are on just the vanguard of breweries in general for Maryland and businesses. So. Well,
I don't know about Maryland. There's definitely been some other ones, but for Montgomery County, certainly.
Okay. Awesome.
We do have a full-scale restaurant here. We also have another location in Prince George's County over in Riverdale Park, and both of our locations do have a full-scale restaurant. But what's interesting about Montgomery County is that we could close the restaurant at any point and still be able to legally operate. And I think that is a huge win for small businesses and small brewers around the county, because if you have to build a whole commercial kitchen on top of also building a whole production brewery, it just adds hundreds of thousands of dollars to your startup expenses. So being able to not have to do that has really helped a lot of businesses thrive in this county.
Awesome. So what made you want to open a brewery? Why a brewery?
A couple of things. One, I really love beer. Secondly, I really love community. And opening up a brewery and having a brewery where we do in downtown Silver Spring that's super accessible, whether you're driving, you're walking, you're biking, you're taking the metro or the bus. We really wanted to have a business that was right in the heart of a community, so everyone could come. So my former life, I'm a former political organizer, and so it sort of melds the community organizing on top of also being able to share a product that I really love. And, I think, drink in certain quantities can make people happy, right? So,
Absolutely.
And bring people together.
Absolutely. That's really, really cool. So tell me about before Denizens Brewery, being a political organizer. We actually have that in common. I was a campaign manager as well.
Oh, nice. Yeah. So I used to work for Mass Equality up in Boston. Worked on protecting same-sex marriage rights in Massachusetts.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. So, listen, I personally benefited from it as well.
Absolutely.
But that was an incredible time for me in my life when I think back to my career. I was there for a few years, and we were fighting back constitutional conventions to try to amend the Constitution to get rid of same-sex marriage, and it was something that we fought like hell for to protect. And I'm really proud of the time that I spent up there. I learned a lot about community organizing, learned a lot about different groups of folks that we can bring together and create a coalition. And sometimes thinking outside of the box, not necessarily the same groups of people that you would normally think of. And that was huge for me. And then after that, I went to law school. I actually worked for the federal government for about 5 years, the Small Business Administration. I was an advisor there. And then after that, opened Denizens with Emily and Jeff.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So that's what brings us here today. Yeah. And a few things in between. So when you were building Denizens, did it start out as the tap room and then you added on the restaurant? Has that always been a part of the vision? Yeah,
so when we first opened, the first year we were open, we actually partnered with a local food truck company. And they ran the restaurant side. They ran the food out of the kitchen. They made all the food. We had nothing to do with it. After about a year, so about 4 years ago, we brought the kitchen in-house, and we've been running the restaurant side ever since. We make all of our food from scratch. We're a scratch-made kitchen.
Fantastic.
We've got lots of different options for people, whether you like burgers and fries and that whole thing, or if you like salads, and we even have, charcuterie plates and some pretty interesting stuff on the menu.
No, I know I'm going to be trying a lot of these things later, so so that's really fantastic. So what's your favorite thing on the menu?
I really like the pork belly.
Okay.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Yes.
The fish and chips are really good as well.
Fantastic.
In terms of food, those are the ones that I enjoy the most.
And then in terms of beer?
It fluctuates for me. One of the things that I'm pretty proud of that we do is that we make a pretty wide range of styles.
Yeah.
So, you've got an oatmeal stout sitting in front of you.
I do indeed.
Yeah, and I have an American style IPA in front of me. I tend towards the hoppier beers, but I also like really clean and crisp beers. So you'll find me drinking all the different lagers that we make as well. So we have, right now on tap, we've got our Born Bohemian Pilsner, which is a year-round beer that we do all the time. And then we have our PGC Premium Lager, which is actually our version of an American adjunct lager. Really, really easy to drink. It's 4.1% alcohol, so it's perfect for this type of weather and super smooth and clean.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So we're definitely going to get into a lot of the other beers later when we take a tour of the brewery. So when you started out on this venture, did you have a lot of barriers to access, not only being a woman, but also a queer woman?
I think that we hit a lot of barriers to entry that any small business is going to hit, especially a startup.
Yeah.
When you're starting a brewery, you're starting a manufacturing company. It's not just retail and hospitality. It is full-scale manufacturing. And when we go on the tour of the brewery, you'll see what I'm talking about with that.
Absolutely.
So it's very capital intensive. And I think any company that's starting out that doesn't have operating history, it's difficult to get access to capital. And so we struggled with that for sure. We were able to get some debt financing by utilizing a state guarantee program called MIDFA, which basically acts as a state guarantee for banks to be able to lend money to start up manufacturing companies. So we were able to take advantage of that. We still weren't able to get as much money as we really needed, so we bootstrapped everything that we did here, from paying our friends with pizza and beer and painting the outside of the building to save $5,000 to utilizing all the chairs and tables that were already here because it had prior use. There were some tables and chairs that were still here, and really just trying to save where we could, and getting our hands dirty and not necessarily paying other people to do certain things. So.
Absolutely. And that can also be a really fun part about being an entrepreneur, and that's what really keeps people going.
Yeah.
So can you tell me if Maryland is, in your opinion, Maryland and also Montgomery County, are they considered small business friendly?
That's a. I don't want to say that they're small business friendly, but I don't want to say they're unfriendly. It's sort of this thing where, people don't know what they don't know, and unfortunately, a lot of times, folks that are in positions of regulatory authority or legislative authority don't necessarily have the life experience to know or really think about all the ramifications of if something changes in the law or the regulation, how that's actually going to impact people day to day.
Absolutely.
So I think that there's a struggle there, right? And as a small business owner, you don't necessarily have the time to be going to, paying attention to all the things that are going on at the county council or the state legislative level. So A, not being able to pay attention, but B, not really having the time to go testify or lobby or try to make sure folks are listening to you. I think that there is definitely an effort to try to support small businesses. I think there's a lot of room for growth in that arena, though.
So, and in terms of room for growth, have you seen them also grow a lot? Are they receptive to change?
Yeah, I think so, for sure. There are certainly people who, I have relationships with that, seem to be open to new ideas and thinking about regulation in a different way. I think that, I think one of the things with regulation, especially with small businesses, is making sure that there's a lot more carrots than there are sticks. I think that there are a lot of rules that get passed a lot of times that are assuming the worst in what folks are doing, as opposed to giving people incentives to act at their best level. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I kind of want to pivot to the LGBTQ community because I know that you do a lot to support the LGBTQ community. Tell us about that. Tell us your support and how that comes out through Denizens and your brand.
Sure. I think we do it in a variety of ways. I think that, in order for us to be an authentic company, we have to show our authentic selves. Emily and I, we met, working in politics in Boston. We've been married for over 10 years. And so we've been LGBT activists in our professional lives before, right? And so we want to make sure that we are being true to ourselves. And so as a company, we do actually take public stands on issues such as LGBT rights. We don't really see it as like a political partisan thing. We see it as like this is just the right thing to do.
Absolutely. They're human rights.
Right, exactly. So. And we take a lot of public stands on issues like that. Same thing with like immigration rights and whatnot. So we do everything from something as small as we have a sandwich board that we stick on the street, which sometimes we use as announcements like, hey, we've got, this band is playing this weekend. But we also have one out there that says, support LGBT rights. And we put that right there in front of our building. So that's like the small example, to hosting pride events, to donating money and product and time to local organizations, everything from Smile to the MocoPride Center to the Human Rights Campaign and trying to support different initiatives like that.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
That is really awesome. So tell us about some of the fun events and programs, things like that you do here.
Yeah, so and also I guess sort of piggybacking on that question, we try to throw events here as well that are welcoming to the LGBT community and others. So
of course.
We do drag shows every other week here on Wednesdays. And then in our Riverdale Park location, we do drag on the weekends, every other weekend. So drag brunch. So that's one thing. We also have we do trivia in Silver Spring every Tuesday. We do trivia every Wednesday over in Riverdale Park. We have live music here in Silver Spring, whether it's like live bands or it's live DJs. We have a house DJ who actually does all vinyl, which is pretty rare to find. DJ Kenny, he does a great job. So he's playing here almost every Friday in the summer, which is pretty cool. We throw lots of festivals. So we have a big festival called Make It Funky, which is happening on Saturday, September 28th.
Awesome.
We bring in all sorts of wild and sour beers from around the area and the country, and we bring in other breweries to showcase their products. It's pretty fun.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
That sounds really cool. So I will also definitely be there.
Great.
Okay, wonderful. So do you have advice for someone who wanted to get into the brewing industry?
There's a couple of things. One, it helps if you're independently wealthy.
Okay. Awesome. So first, have tons of money.
Have tons of money. I would also say it helps to really want to work. When you own a brewery, you've got your hands in manufacturing, you've got your hands in wholesale, you've got your hands in retail, you've got your hands in hospitality. There's always something to go wrong and to go well. 5 years in, we're still learning every day how to be better at different processes. And, at this point, our company has 70 employees. We've really grown in the last 5 years. So everything from staff management to making sure that are you collecting payment correctly? Are you pricing your products correctly? So really thinking about all those things, thinking about distribution, signing with the distributor or not signing with the distributor, buying trucks, making sure that you've got, you're adhering to all the different regulations, because we manufacture, at the core of what we do is we manufacture alcohol. That
Absolutely.
is the core of what we do.
Absolutely.
And so in the United States of America, if you're going to have a company that does that, you're regulated on the federal level, the state level, and the local level. Whereas if we were just opening a restaurant, we would just be regulated by the state and the county. Not so as a brewery. We also have the whole federal level of regulation we have to deal with in terms of reporting, taxes, et cetera. So I would just say be ready to work. You have to really, really love what you're doing. And sometimes you won't find out whether you love it for, after you opened your doors. Luckily for us, we do love what we do, and we're really happy that we're here and open and whatnot. But I would say, those are my two things. Have lots of money. I guess three things. Have lots of money. or access to it.
Okay.
Really, really love beer and love the product that you make. And then third is just be ready to work really hard.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good. So buckets of money.
Yeah.
Love beer.
Yeah.
And working hard.
Yeah.
Perfect. I love that. So on the other end, what's your favorite part about the job now? Like now that your doors are open, everything's running. Like what do you love about it?
I really love the community that we've built.
Okay.
We see it here every day, which is pretty cool. You know, at any point you can come into Denizens and look around, and you're going to see people of all different ages, all different ethnicities, all different genders, all different backgrounds, and it's pretty cool to see. It's not a tap room that is filled with just a bunch of white guys and beards, right? Or to rephrase that, straight white guys with beards, right?
Yeah.
So it's something that we really wanted, and it was something that we've done intentionally to make sure that we're building a community-focused brand that really, truly is community-focused. You know, we're in the heart of downtown Silver Spring. If we only had a bunch of straight white guys and beards, like where are we getting those customers from, right?
Sure.
Silver Spring is so incredibly diverse, and it's one of the things that, you know, as someone who was born and raised in Silver Spring, I really love and I'm proud of, and it was an absolute amazing opportunity for me to grow up in this area, to go to school with people who didn't look like me and didn't have my background and had different experiences. And we're trying to build that same sort of approach and community right here in Silver Spring in our tap room. And we're doing the same thing in Riverdale Park. I mean, we opened that place, I think it's a month and a half, 2 months ago now. So we're still in the very, very brand new startup of that phase, but we're doing the same thing intentionally over there.
That's really cool. That's really cool. So I was going to say what's next for Denizens, but you just opened another location. And you have an amazing festival coming up. So but what is next for Denizens?
We just signed with a distributor in Maryland and DC. We're still going to self-distribute in Montgomery County to bypass the, I guess it's alcoholic beverage services now, as opposed to DLC. Yes, they just rebranded. So we're going to still do that, but we just signed with the distributor for the rest of the state. So you're going to see our beer in a lot more locations.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, whether you're going to a bar or restaurant, or you're just picking up a 6-pack at your local mom and pop, beer and wine store.
Yeah, I love hearing that. I love hearing that. So we are going to take a tour of the tap room, the restaurant, and also the brewery itself when we come back. Welcome back. We're so glad that you're joining us. So we are here in the Denizens Brewery, and we're just going to take you around. Julie's going to show us where all the magic happens.
Yeah, let's do it. Cheers.
Awesome. Cheers.
Let's get it done. All right, so where we are right now is we're in the lower tap room of our Silver Spring location. So this is where we make all the beer. So,
awesome.
Yeah, so I'm gonna show you real quick sort of the process of how we make the product. In the process of making beer, the first thing you do is make hot liquid, and then you cool it down, and then you add the last ingredient, and then it turns into beer.
Perfect.
So there's 4 major pieces of equipment. Well, I guess really 5 right here in front of us. The first thing is over here on this, right next to you, that's the mash tun, which is this copper cylindrical thing. And then up above it is the grist hopper. And then to my left, this is the boil kettle, also known as the kettle.
Okay.
And then further to my left is the hot liquor tank. And then beyond that is the cold liquor tank. So those are the 5 big pieces of equipment that we use to start the recipe off.
And about how much do these hold?
This is a 15-barrel system.
Okay.
So what that means in layman's terms is every time we make a batch of beer, we're making 15 barrels, which is the equivalent of about 30 kegs.
Fantastic.
So you think back to when you were in college and you were at a keg party, one of those kegs is half of a barrel, so 2 of them equals 1 barrel.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so do you know the 4 ingredients that go in beer?
Hops.
That's 1.
Okay. I got 1 of them.
Water.
Water, of
and
course.
Then yeast.
Okay.
And then malt.
And malt.
Yeah, so the way that the first steps that you do is in the grist hopper, there's actually a mill room that we have. So we purchase malted barley, which is the main ingredient. There's some grain that we get that's malted that's not barley. Sometimes it's unmalted stuff, which will add to sort of the mouthfeel and the flavor profile, but not necessarily create the starches that you need to turn it into beer.
Absolutely.
But we get it. We mill the grain in our mill room, which is over here to the side, and then we have a pump that sort of shimmies the grain into the grist hopper. It sits in there, and then we open the lid to the mash tun, and we put the grain inside, and that's where we have the water introduced to the recipe.
Okay.
So you've got the malt and the water. That's the first two ingredients. It sits in there at a certain temperature. And what's happening is the water is turning the starches that are in there into sugars. That's sort of the chemical reaction that's going on.
And how long does that process take?
It depends on the recipe, but it's generally about 90 minutes or so. 60 minutes to 90 minutes, not super long. And then actually on the inside of this container is actually a false bottom. So there's like a mesh screen at the bottom where the grain will sit on top of that, and then we pull all the liquid out. And transfer the liquid over here to the boil kettle and leave the grain inside. Once that happens, we actually scoop out all of the grain that's in there, and at that point it's called spent grain, and we put it into rain barrels, and we actually have a partnership with a local farmer in Montgomery County. They come and pick up the grain, and they use it as feed for their animals, so pigs, cattle, etc.
That is really awesome. See, I was going to say, and it's so sustainable, just like Montgomery County, which is absolutely fantastic.
It's very true.
Wonderful. Okay, so what are we drinking today?
You and I are actually drinking one of our IPAs. Okay. And funny enough, we are filming on National IPA Day.
All right, well, cheers to that.
Yeah, cheers to that.
Happy National IPA Day.
One of those many weird made-up holidays that exist, but I'll take it. So this is just an American-style IPA.
Awesome.
So that's what we're drinking right now.
I dig it.
Thank you. Well, speaking of IPAs, I mean, it's a hop-forward beer. So that's the third ingredient that goes into making beer.
Yes.
So after we've transferred the hot liquid over here to the kettle, inside of here, we'll actually bring the liquid to a boil. Okay. And this is when we add the hops to the recipe. So depending on when you add hops will determine how bitter the beer will be. Because when you think about it, hops are a flower, right? And they have these oils that get extracted when it touches the hot water. When you think about making a cup of tea, for example, what if you heated up some water, you throw some tea bags in the cup, you put the water in there, and then you forgot you did it, you walk away for an hour. Think about how bitter that cup of tea is going to be when you come back to it. It's the same idea with hops, theoretically speaking. Okay. So the longer the hops are in the boil, the more bitter the beer will be. The later during the boil that you add it, the more of the aroma and the citrusy flavors that come out. That's what's really going to be evoked into the flavor of the beer.
So all of those like heavier, hoppier beers that I really enjoy, that's because they take longer to make and process?
The process is generally the same in terms of time. It's just when the hops are added to the actual process. Okay. That's where the length of time comes in.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah. Awesome.
So after we've done that, we've boiled it, we've got the hops in there, the first three ingredients are done. Now we're going to add the yeast. But to do that, we have to walk over to the cold side so I can show you how that's done.
Fantastic. Let's go over to the cold side.
All right, cool. So I wanted to point out over here, you see our forklift, right? The reason I point the forklift out is the nickname that we have for her is Ruth. And the reason why is the last people that actually owned this forklift was the Supreme Court of the United States.
That's just so cool.
I personally love it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so we named it after Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Supreme Court Justice, and it's really exciting.
Yes, so you have the forklift of justice.
Forklift of justice, that's correct.
That is fantastic. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah. So let's come on back here.
Fantastic.
I'll show you the cold side. And what we're standing amongst right now is our fermenters. These fermenters are also 15 barrels, just like the front side, the hot side, the brew house. So these hold the exact same amount of liquid as what we've produced through one batch of beer in the front. So once the liquid is put back here, before you add the yeast, the liquid is actually referred to as wort. W-O-R-T is how you spell it, which is just basically unfermented beer liquid. That's what it means. Before we put the yeast in, though, because yeast is a living organism, we actually have to cool the temperature down because it's just been boiling, right? If you threw yeast into boiling liquid, you'd basically murder the yeast and it wouldn't do anything, which would make nobody happy.
Exactly.
So we actually push all of the wort through a heat exchanger where we pump cold water using that cold liquor tank that I showed you before. through one side of the tube, and then the other side is the wort that's pushing through. So the heat gets exchanged.
Okay.
The cold liquor turns into hot liquor. That goes into the hot liquor tank, so we can reuse it for the next day's brew. Okay. And then the wort is cooled down enough so that when it goes inside the fermenter, we can then add the yeast, and we know that the yeast is not going to get murdered. So when the yeast is in there, what it's doing is it's those sugars that were created in the first step with the starch being converted. The yeast is eating all of those sugars and turning it into alcohol.
That's really cool.
Yeah, and so what you see right down here, this is referred to as a blow-off tube.
Okay.
So this is indicating that there's a lot of fermentation going on inside of this tank right here. So the yeast are really happy. They're eating up all the sugars. When yeast eats the sugar, it actually creates CO2. So you have to have a blow-off tube here in order to make sure that the pressure is released from the tank.
Yep.
Because if you didn't, you'd basically be creating a bomb.
Yeah.
And nobody wants that.
I was going to say, it seems like
right.
it.
Nobody wants that. So we have the blow-off tube, so the CO2 is released here. And once this starts slowing down, you do a lot of measurements using equipment, but you can also just visually see as the bubbles start getting slower, less active, you can kind of tell that the yeast is getting to the end of actually fermenting the liquid.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, so that's how that's done. And then the last thing we do is once it's done fermenting, we cold crash it. So we drop the temperature to somewhere around 38, 40 degrees.
And so is this automated within the process? Does the temperature drop once or do you have to set like a mechanism?
We have to set it. So
okay.
All of these tanks are what is referred to as glycol jacketed, which means there's an interior part and there's sort of this like sleeve around it that has glycol, which is a liquid that doesn't freeze.
Okay.
And you can control the temperature of the fermenter itself and the liquid that's inside by controlling the temperature of the glycol. So we've got a whole system that's connected to that. So that's how we can make sure it's the right temperature.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. So the last step before you actually get it into a keg or into a can is you're going to come over here and you'll see this is what's referred to as a bright tank. Sometimes people refer to it as a finishing tank. This is essentially, you've done all the fermentation, it's turned into alcohol. You're gonna put it in here and let it sit for about 24 hours.
Okay.
And what's happening in here, because the liquid is still cold, is all of the different particles that were inside suspended in the liquid from the yeast will drop to the bottom. And because you wanna have the beer to be clear, right?
Of course.
So once that happens, after it's been sitting in here for about 24 hours and it's cooled off, you will push CO2 back into the tank, and then it's carbonated, and then you put it into kegs or you put it into cans from there, and you're ready to drink it.
Oh, fantastic. That's awesome. And that's how we arrive at this.
Yeah.
So how much do you produce on a weekly basis?
We brew beer probably about 3 days a week.
Okay.
And then the other days we're packaging, so either putting it in kegs or sometimes we're working on cellaring. So we're gonna walk over here, I'll actually show you some of the wood barrels that we use. Some of the beer that we make, we actually will put into wood barrels before putting it into the bright tank.
Okay.
So it'll go from the fermenter into the wood barrels, it'll age for a while, and then we'll put it into the bright tank to finish it.
Oh, fantastic. Let's go check out those barrels.
So right here you've got some examples. So these are all different types of barrels that used to have distilled spirits in them. So what I'm looking at here, you've got some Heaven Hill bourbon barrels that we've got some beer in. We've used everything from whiskey and bourbon barrels to tequila to mezcal. We've used rum barrels, we've used port, brandy, you name it. It's a lot of fun to use this type of wood because the different flavors that come out and add that sort of flavor profile to the finished beer is pretty interesting and really cool.
So what do you like to play with in terms of barrels for your own flavor palette?
I really like wine barrels.
Okay.
I like, especially when it's like Chardonnay barrels that have been used. That for me is something really interesting that I enjoy. One thing I also like is using barrels that have been used by other local producers. So for example, over here at the back of the wall, you see the barrels that have black on the ends?
Yes.
Those are actually barrels that we got from Republic Restoratives, which is a women-owned, LGBT-owned distillery based in DC.
That's
and
really
so
cool.
that's some of their old bourbon barrels. So we've been able to use those to age some of our beer in it, which is kind of a cool local collaboration.
That is a really amazing local collaboration. That's awesome. That is really awesome. So what product do you get when you are fermenting or finishing off your product in a Chardonnay barrel?
It depends on what you're doing. Usually when we're making the beers in the wood barrels, we're actually creating what's referred to as mixed fermentation beers. Mm-hmm. So there's some wild yeast that we put in there. There's a little bacteria that we put in there.
Awesome.
As well as the beer that we've already made with the regular ale or lager strain. Usually it's with an ale strain that we've made the original beer. And what happens is if you fill up 4 or 5 different barrels of the same beer that you've made and let it age in there, you'll at the end of the process blend all of the beer back together. You're not going to just take it from one barrel and just throw that into a keg.
Yeah.
You want to put everything into the right format in terms of what is the taste profile you're looking for. And so Jeff, my business partner who does all this stuff, he's got a really, really good palate for that. It's one of his favorite things to do is to blend the beer after it's been aging for a while and come up with like a really unique flavor profile.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
That is really cool. Can you tell us anything more about the brewing process that you'd like us to know?
Sure. One thing that people don't realize that most of the time as a brewer, if you're doing that for a living, is really you're just cleaning. That's really like 85% of what you do all day is working with chemicals to make sure that everything is crystal clean. In order to make sure that the beer is not going to be infected and that you're working with absolutely clean surfaces.
Yep.
So that's a huge part of it. It's also a lot of moving kegs around. It's a lot of heavy lifting. It's not sitting around just drinking beer all day. Although I know there are some days, I'm sure everybody in any industry feels like, I just want to sit around and drink beer all day.
Absolutely.
You're around beer a lot. You do have to taste it a lot, but it's not this sort of fantasy world where you get to just hang out and drink beer all the time.
Exactly. It's not the Willy Wonka factory.
Exactly.
And just,
Yeah, because it's manufacturing. I mean, there are safety concerns. You got to make sure you're wearing full protective gear. You know, whether you're protecting your eyes, your ears, your extremities. You're always got to wear your boots. Make sure you're got the pants and and the gloves and everything. So
wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking us around.
Yeah, thank you, Phillip.
Yeah,
This was
absolutely.
fun.
Cheers. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of MocoPride. Now I'm going to get back to my good Judy's, enjoy this amazing beer and pork belly and octopus, and you all have a wonderful night. Take care.